decolonial publishing practices as kind of a final destination. We want to advocate for it to be more of an ongoing process that requires continuous reflection. So there's Davina Cooper's concept of everyday utopias that we were drawing on when we were talking about this. And we were thinking that we could also translate this into everyday queer decolonialities. So little efforts, some practical steps to be more aware of practices that are happening that need to be changed. For example, rethinking citation practices that reinforce colonial hierarchies, and also the need to redesign review processes to include more marginalized perspectives. But with that, there's also the importance of considering that it's not only about how we publish things, but also what we publish. And I keep thinking about this more and more as I'm in the final stages of writing my dissertation, because I think it is so important. And there has been this movement of writing differently, but we should also consider acts of publishing differently, where we legitimize things like poetry and prose, storytelling and memory work. So forms of knowledge that are often dismissed as less scientific. And as we all know, in many non-Western cultures, including my own and indigenous cultures, for instance, storytelling and memory work is such an important epistemology that prioritizes lived experiences, but that can also be connected to theoretical abstraction still. So it doesn't have to be opposed to one another. So, and something we really want to push is to elevate the stories and experiences of trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming bodies of color, because there is still a severe lack of that, and acts where these bodies are being overlooked and muted. So we hope there can be, we can create, looking forward, a platform to kind of amplify the diversity of these communities, as there's also very important within group differences. And last but not least, looking ahead, we are excited to announce that we also have an upcoming stream for EGOS 2025 in Athens on creativity and queer world making. And we really we hope that we are able to, with that, carve out a space for new possibilities where we can talk about living, being, and organizing from a queer decolonial perspective. And so instead of just responding to established frameworks, we would, as a collective, like to build new ones. And we invite you to join us in this collective process. And again, thank you for having me. And I'm so excited to engage with everyone.
Thank you. I'm just checking. I think Alison is here. Alison, does the technology work for you?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Wonderful.
I think the session is so much better without any introduction from myself. Ebru, thanks for teaching us once again from your perspective, and thanks for all the work that you've been doing with Ella Reese in the Queer Research Network in the past for gender work and organization, and now independently from that. So thank you so much. And is Alexia going next?
I can go next. I thought it was Sarai, but I'm happy to go next if that works. Is that okay?
I'm not going to interfere because I just knew him.
Okay. Should I go next? Yes. Okay. Okay. I would like to hopefully share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
perfect.
I lost the chat. But okay, I will go ahead even without the chat. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Alexia Panayiotou. I'm based at the University of Cyprus. I'm very grateful and very honored to be on this amazing panel with so many of you that I really respect and admire. And I also do have the best time slot, I think, because it's 2 in the afternoon here. So what I wanted to do today is share some of our experiences in regards to the Gender Work and Organization Journal, and more specifically, the experience that I had as I found myself as one of the associate editors, initially walking out of the first editorial meeting with the new group, and then, like most, if not all of you, walking out of the journal. And I wanted to specifically share, although, let's see, it's working, okay, a particular experience, that of being in the middle of organizing a writing workshop at the time of our walkout, a workshop that was initially supposed to be sponsored by the journal, by the publishers, Writing as Crossing Boundaries. And the situation that we found ourselves in when we walked out of the journal. And that was that I had already sent out the call. I committed to hosting this event. I had already incurred some costs related to the event. And there I was in the middle of this situation, really not knowing how to go forward. I will also share with you something that you may not know, that I came to academia from a feminist NGO background. I thought I would be able to keep both roles when I entered academia, but alas, one of my many evaluation committees on the way to tenure told me that these two roles were simply not possible, because being an activist was not just detrimental to my academic career, but downright irrelevant. Now, I'm sharing this with you because when I was in the middle of this situation to host the workshop that was at that point without funding and without sponsors, you all stepped in through Mia Plontikov's and Alison Pollin's what's the right word? I'm sorry. Thoughts and care. The community of GWO stepped in, and many of you graciously funded this workshop. I'm immensely grateful, but also at that moment, I felt I was just so happy to be alive and witness the community coming together to get this workshop off the ground. And I thought, really, for all of you here today who are academic activists, in that moment, I thought, yes, these two roles are really not impossible to combine at all. In fact, I would say they're absolutely essential to be together. And I, in many ways, I feel that that's why we're here today. So thank you once again, all of you who graciously supported this. I think it was a very big success, not so much in the number of people who participated. There were very few of us, but what came out of this workshop. And these are some thoughts, some questions, and some lessons that I wanted to share with you. First, I think we learned the power of sitting, just sitting down with each other. And what you see here is one of our many instances. This is a local coffee shop sharing Greek coffee and Cyprus sweets. But really, I wanted to ask us, what happens when we just sit down with each other and converse and talk about what we're facing? And the power of standing. Thank you, Alison and Susan, for these amazing photos. One of the events of the workshop entailed physically crossing over to the other side of Cyprus. Now, you probably know Cyprus is divided. It's been divided since 1974. And as part of our workshop, we walked and we physically crossed to an area that I don't often go to, that is prohibited, that has all this baggage for me as a Greek Cypriot. We crossed over and we saw, and I wanted to ask, and for us to think, what happens when we just stand with each other and look around us and look at things through different eyes or through other people's eyes? Actually, what happens when we stand up? And when we stand up against abuse or against patriarchy or against discriminatory and problematic publishing situations? And then what happens when we stand up for what we believe in? And this was a very powerful moment, I think, for those of us who participated in the workshop. And the power of walking. We walked a lot. We walked across the so-called Green Line. We walked together. And I wanted to ask our community, what happens when we walk forward with others, trying to cross boundaries, even into the unknown? Let's consider the power of walking away from abusive relationships, from destructive publishing practices. What is the power of simply walking out? Obviously, I think it's immense, because what we learned in the workshop, I think, and many of you are here, and thank you for being here, and thank you for participating, and thank you for sponsoring. We built a really powerful community. And you see all of us here, it's work, it's dinners at one of the participants' homes, it's sharing a coffee. But we got things, I think, off the ground in a different way. So I think one of the lessons we got from the workshop was that we are able to cross the boundary of patriarchal and neoliberal publishing to walk towards the future. We learned that we can do that by actively engaging the community. And I think this is also why we're here today. And that we can do it by actively doing academia differently. And many of you here, you're already doing that. And I'm very grateful. And I adore your work. I know some of you are also involved in publishing a book series to this effect. But let's try to think about how we can read differently and write differently, review differently. And then ultimately, the reason I think we're here is we can publish differently. And I really think that it is possible through sitting with each other, walking with each other, standing with each other, and just crossing to this other way of doing things. I will just end with a poem, well, a haiku, sorry, by my friend Lisa Suhair Majaj, who is an Arab American poet and also one of the people who ran one of the sessions in our writing workshop. Lisa says, "Fractured at the core, I walk in between spaces, haunted, unmoored, here." So, thank you.
Thank you, Alexia. That was really inspiring. I can't see the poster, so I'll just call the next person I remember. Melissa, do you mind joining in?
Not at all. Thanks so much, Nella. And thank you so much, Ebru and Alexia and everyone who's spoken and contributed so far. Just so interesting hearing your thoughts and reflections and projections, I suppose, sort of anticipations about what the future might and could hold for us. So thank you so much. I'd really like to pick up on that final point of Alexia's with reference to that beautiful haiku about unmooring, because unmooring, of course, can be both very disconcerting, but it's also very freeing. And when you experience that sense of unmooring collectively and collaboratively, then of course it's very different from feeling very isolated and unsure. And I think it's that sense of collectivity, collaboration, a standing, sitting, walking, speaking together that has been so important to feminist organisation studies so far, and is absolutely vital to its future, to our future as well. So I want, on that note, I wanted just to share a few reflections on a much more mundane example of working differently and of doing feminist organisation studies differently that I've been fortunate enough to be able to experience over the past few years. And it's really made me think very much about a journal being so much more than the journal itself. So a journal is not simply words on paper. And over the past few years, I think I've learned a lot about what that means. And it's been, without wishing to sound very trite, it's been very affirming, encouraging, and unmooring in a good way. So in 2021, the University of Kent hosted the Gender Work and Organisation Conference entirely on Zoom, because we were sort of still at the tail end of periods of lockdown. And with some colleagues and collaborators, Leanne Kutcher, Moya Lloyd and Kat Reich, I co-hosted a stream on the influence that Judith Butler's writing has had on our work in gender and feminist organisation studies to date. And somehow there was something about this stream, it just kind of enabled us to connect in a way that many of us hadn't really experienced before in academic conferences. And of course, what Alexia was just talking about there with the experience of the feminist writing workshops and the Writing Differently work that's been going on in kind of pockets of intellectual activism within our field, there is that kind of sense of collective connection and collaboration. But I think in a mainstream conference, should we say, I hadn't experienced that before. And I can see some of the people here today who spoke and contributed to that stream, and you know, we're so grateful to you for the experience that we all had over the 3 days of the conference. We just felt that there was a way of working together that wasn't the norm in a conference stream, and we gained Alison's support for continuing the conversations that we started in that conference in a network and a reading group that we've been able to keep going ever since. So Judith Butler joined us in conversation in May the following year as part of this Judith Butler network that we set up. And we were able to invite a range of speakers and discussants to take part in that event. It was all on Zoom. And of course, you know, that enables people to connect in a way that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. We had no budget for the event and so on. But you know, there is a downside. We don't get that immersive, embodied experience of being able to share and sit down in and walk in the same space, and of that kind of real intimacy and connection that you get when you're sharing food and drinks, particularly in each other's homes, and you're moving between spaces, and you begin to build a collective and a community, albeit, you know, relatively fleetingly in the moment, but that you then hope to sustain. And it was that hope for sustaining the feel of that stream that has really underpinned this network. So Butler's work has obviously had a significant impact on work and organisation studies and on feminist thinking and activism in the field. But this was the first time, I think, as far as we were aware, that we'd probably had the opportunity to engage directly with Judith Butler in person, in conversation. So when a large group of us kind of walked away from Wiley in the Gender Work and Organisation Journal earlier this year, we separated the network from the journal that had been its hub until this point. But we all felt that it was really important to try to keep the network going, which is what we've been doing. So To Draw on Writing by Alison and Emanuela and other colleagues, it provides a space in which we can kind of co-learn in and through our vulnerability. So this network provides a space in which we can share ideas, reflections, in which we can cross those boundaries between our working lives and our lives outside of work, between the work that we're doing individually and the work that we're doing collaboratively. I hope that it's the antithesis of the traditional conference stream. It's a place where we can sit, a little like those workshops organised and discussed by Alexia. It's a way of emphasising the value of sitting and standing together and of properly engaging, that kind of active listening to one another. So it highlights, for me anyway, how our ways of sharing and understanding are so much more than just words on paper. So writing differently is so important, but there is so much else going on in what the future of feminist work and organisation studies can be. And these kinds of networks and opportunities for collaboration, pockets of kind of intellectual activism, they provide us with focal points for us as activist communities, as intellectual groups, and the academic work that we do. They're spaces in which we can learn together, learn from each other. But I think the really crucial thing about them is that they're places where we can share the kind of half-baked ideas, the work in progress. We can be critical friends to one another, and we can allow our ideas and interests to emerge and evolve collaboratively simply by saying, my position on this, my perspective on this, my circumstances, my situation is different to yours. So I'm not seeing this the way that you see it. Can you explain it to me in a way that we can engage and learn from one another? So those moments of kind of impromptu reflexivity have just been invaluable in learning from one another and sharing ideas. So those opportunities, those pockets that we work to protect and preserve and nurture, where our work can emerge and evolve collaboratively and collectively, and perhaps most of all spontaneously in the moment with one another, I think are crucial to our future. So this is about writing, but it's also about, well, as Alexia said, it's about doing differently, engaging in reflexive practice in the way that Ebru talked about. And this feels almost like, as I said, the antithesis of what the current academic publishing machinery is all about, and its infrastructure. So the conferences, the review processes, and what they demand of us. For me, these kinds of networks, the workshops, the pockets of collaboration that merge our intellectual, our activist, and crucially, to borrow from Lynn Siegel in her recent brilliant book, Lean on Me, it's a way that we can bring care work into what we do and how we do it. And I think bringing together the kind of intellectual, the activist, and the caring in the way that we work is absolutely, it's just vital in all senses of the word, to the future of kind of critical feminist sharing of knowledge within organisation studies and more widely. So yeah, for me, I think I'm learning so much about what it means not just to write together and to work together, but to do feminist organisation studies differently. And it's such a privilege to be doing that with all of you. So thank you. Thank you so much. Can I hand back to who's going next? Nella, are you next?
I think it's Siri. Siri, do you want to come in next? And but Melissa, thank you so much about this. I think doing differently is the kind of key phrase that is kind of being repeated throughout this talk. It is very inspiring. Thank you. Siri, over to you.
Okay.
Sorry. Can you see my screen?
Perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So, hello everyone. First off, thank you very much for having me here. I'm honored to be able to contribute to this session. I'm a junior faculty at the University of Rhode Island in the US. And in my presentation, I will talk about part of my journey to studying ecological crisis from feminist theory and why we need it so badly in this current moment. So I undertook my PhD studies at a very mainstream business school, but with a very non-mainstream advisors. And I knew I wanted to do unconventional research, but I was still attracted to the buzz around sustainability and the promises that sustainable discourses make around social change, betterment of societies, ecologies, and justice. So could I work with feminist theory and explore ecological crisis at a mainstream American business school? And after a lot of exploration and reading feminist literature, I realized, oh yes, absolutely, and I must do that. So early in my studies, I began reading feminist materialists and was taken away by their arguments around social reproduction of livelihoods in concrete places. Their accounts grounded me on everyday practices, sustaining material life. Scholars who were working with ecology were likening women's unpaid invisible labor to nature's invisible value and regeneration capacity that is taken for granted in our industrial ways of living today. On the one hand, I was having to read mainstream management research where all natural environment is conceptualized as a resource to be exploited. On the other hand, I was lovingly exploring these feminists who were questioning the very foundations of economic theory, climate policy, and production and consumption relations that destroy our nature and the living ways of world's historically marginalized peoples, peasants, indigenous peoples, house workers, even parents, to name a few. So I was literally living in two worlds. I was bombarded by my PhD program that I should start writing publishable papers. Otherwise, it's a career suicide. But I was lucky to be guided by my advisors who told me that I could actually submit my work to GWO conference. And this was in 2013. And there I learned about the journal and its amazing feminist community. And so this was only the beginning of my journey. And along the way, I explored feminist philosophers who questioned the separation of mind, body, reason, emotion, nature, and culture, and all those other old dualisms. During my studies, I also met feminist science studies, and oh my God, that was an incredibly amazing semester. I learned all about how gendered, racialized, and colonial assumptions and practices operate under the big capital science. My mind was blowing as I was going, exploring all these intellectual work. But my cohorts in the PhD program were looking at me like, Sarai, what are you doing? What are you reading these books? Like, we don't read books here. We need to read journal articles in these top journals and write to them. And they were indicating that I was wasting my time, not writing publishable papers in their own terms. But I had my North Star at that point, and I knew exactly what I was doing. So, and from then on, I landed on feminist neo-materialisms that questions human agency, specifically from the feminist lens that problematize the Eurocentric man at the center of knowledge and supposedly controlling all humans and non-humans, all the others. And I mean, along the way, I have been also very much inspired by Gibson Graham's diverse economies, who showed us that we actually live in a more than capitalist and more than human world, and we need to change our way of thinking, talking, writing, and living accordingly. you might be wondering why I'm talking about all these various bodies of work that I had the privilege to explore in my PhD studies and on. The reason is that because I wanted to show, at least for me, how feminist theory is incredibly rich, incredibly intellectual, and at the same time, amazingly concrete. It provides us intellectual tools to make sense of the mess of various different kinds that we are in, and at the same time has the capacity to show us that there are other ways possible. And it's generative, hopeful, and affirmative. And I think that's exactly what we need right now, that we need critical analysis of our conditions while at the same time imagining, writing, working toward a world that is possible. So perhaps because of where I've been all along since the beginning of my academic studies, that my intervention has always been writing in the way I see or the way I want to see the world, not the way around. And I'm inspired by the words of Katherine Gibson and her colleagues in Going Forward, and that they wrote it in their book called Manifesto for Living in the Anthropocene. And I will end with their words that they wrote in their book. We can choose to read for difference rather than dominance. Think connectivity rather than hyperseparation. Look for multiplicity, multiple climate changes, multiple ways of living with Earth others. We can find ways forward in what is already being done in the here and now and attend the performative effects of any analysis. Tell stories in a hopeful and open way, allowing for the possibility that life is dormant rather than dead. We can use our critical capacities to recover our rich traditions of counterculture and theorize them outside of mainstream alternative binary. All these ways of thinking and researching give rise to new strategies for going forward. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Siri. That was wonderful. I just noted that Elo is here, and I was wondering, hi. I know that Ebru spoke first, and I know you said you're going to go as a pair, but I was just wondering if you would like to say a few words, or are you, yeah?
Happily, yeah. Thank you so much. I got the dates mixed up, so it's totally my fault. I'm sorry for only coming now. I missed what Ibra was saying, so I hope I'm just not like repeating. But yeah, I'm so happy we're having this get together. It's a great moment to hear where everyone's at, and to see where we can go from here. I think it's very, very needed. I wanted to talk a little bit about the queer perspective as well, the research that I'm doing, but also just the relevance generally of creating space for the queer community in gender and organization research at the moment. There's just massive anti-queer backlash, and I guess that as like maybe also like if people are not part of the queer community, maybe you like it's not felt as strongly or perceived as strongly, or it's just not as much like in your face. But as queer people, it's really like frightening times, especially as non-binary trans people. It's really, really scary what's going on around the world and how much there's pushback against us. So it's made me notice as well how we can't take anything for granted, really, and how also gender research and conferences are so cis-binary and straight still, just in their assumptions and then the way we do stuff in the spaces we create. And there's just often no place for queers to be or feel fully welcome with their research, but also just like as scholars in the field. So I think that became also very queer with the queer troublemaker special issue that we had at GWO. And that had to move and had to go away from Wiley, from GWO, with everything that went down. So just to see how this momentum of feeling like, oh, all those spaces are opening up and we have this queer feminist research network at GWO and we're expanding, it makes such a difference for people, how quickly that can also, spaces can like close up again and you don't know like where you're welcome and where to go next. And but also to see how this queer feminist research network that we that we started because of Alison's initiation to give a space, that we had workshops, that we are at all the big conferences by now, that we started this special issue, which now landed elsewhere and found a new home at Curum with Richard Longman, thankfully. But to just feel like we can't take it for granted, and we really have to continue working to maintain spaces for queers in gender and organization research. So to just it just made me really aware of how fragile all of this is, and how also just creating that space has changed the perspective for queer scholars in organization studies massively. Like, so many people that came to one of the workshops, that came to the conference and just said like, hey, this has changed my outlook and my wish to actually stay in academia, and to see that in gender and organization studies, there is a space for me. And I didn't know that I could even do my PhD on this topic, or find perspectives for me. And that's really been, an eye opener for me. And also to just see how people in the network support each other, and how that's just not the usual. So yeah, I think we really have to make sure that we maintain and create new spaces for queer scholars and for queer research in organization studies, and manage to continue doing that, to find inclusion also maybe in new journals, and new places, create new places together. But yeah, I think what also, because I think Ibro talked a little bit about intersectionality and how important it is to join those struggles. I think especially when the queer agenda was used so much for genocidal campaigning and stuff like that, we really also noticed how we're all entangled, and we all have to fight together to ensure that everyone's advancing and gaining more freedom, and not just some on the on the back of others. So we also started a network for activism for Palestine, solidarity with Palestine, from this queer feminist research network. So I feel like it's been a springboard for more activist action within gender and organization studies. And I would really hope that this remains, and that we don't lose the momentum and the community, and that we can keep on thriving and doing our thing, and find spaces to publish, to come together, and all of that, to support each other. Thank you for giving me some time. I don't want to take any more, but if anyone has questions, wants to join efforts or organize together, please feel free to get in touch with me.
I was really glad you could join us. So thank you for this intervention. I have Alice's talk, Alice Wikström's talk. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us today because she has been tied up with university things. But if that's okay with you, I would like to read out her message, and then we can kind of continue in the same spirit. So, sorry, it's really tiny font on my phone. So this is not going to look pretty, but focus on the words because they're beautiful. I would first of all like to apologize for not being there with you today, and extend my gratitude to Alison for offering to share these thoughts with you. I would then like to confess that I have no idea of what it is like to pursue meaningful feminisms outside of corporate publishing, because that is the only system that I know. To some extent, I think of that as a gift, because I was educated to navigate it. I also entered academia at a time where scholars, some of you here today, already had worked tirelessly for decades to legitimize ways of thinking, practicing, and relating premised on feminist thought. And though I have been allowed to pursue my work from such fertile ground, I have also witnessed colleagues being bullied, our research being marginalized, and parts of our academic homes hollowed out. Lately, I have been reflecting on this, and in particular, how corporate interests, academic institutions, accreditations, impact factors, grant egos, and affective intensities entangle in ways that benefit individualism and competition over interdependency and collaboration, all while making it difficult to readily discern any line of flight. I think about this as my body gets tired and my words grow thin, stifled from the endless feeling that I both should be and do more, while recognizing that nothing ever is enough. I think about this as I lose touch with my thoughts and ideas, not to mention those of others. And when the notion of publish or perish begin to feel like a matter of degree rather than two mutually exclusive trajectories. And I write these words from a position of privilege, not only limited to my body I was born in and the rooms I have access to, but also the material conditions of my academic existence, which for many remains precarious or under increased institutional pressure, often due to financial interests. For me, that is the threat of the pursuit of meaningful feminisms, because regardless of the theoretical wave that calls us, the empirical context we work in, or the method we use, our work does not lend itself to easy answers. To challenge the perpetuation of inequalities, to combat violence on an institutional and intersubjective level, and to articulate alternative visions of what it means to live well together, we need firm grounds to stand on, rather than condition that drive us to detach us from ourselves as well as those around us. So without answers in hand, I hope that we as a collection without contours, I love that, can commit to nurture ourselves and others to enable stronger roots to form, especially the wake of commercialized pressures. Here, I believe that it is key that those of us who are in the position to do so work within our academic institutions and communities to challenge individualist ideals, resist the evaluation of our work according to narrow frames and on the basis of productivity alone, and invest in the formal and informal structures that enables us to do our work and to do it well. Because I, for one, refuse to believe that great scholarship stands in opposition to having the time to think, encountering others with care and pluralism in perspectives, valued and methods used. Decades of feminist research has showed us otherwise. Thank you. From Alice. This was absolutely beautiful. I'm sorry for for how I read it. I read it from a JPEG rather than a Word document. So forgive I hope Alice will be able to forgive me the delivery of this beautiful, beautiful intervention.
I don't think that Alison has made it back. It's because of internet trouble.
Yeah, Alison is having Wi-Fi troubles for some time now, which is why I agreed to read Alice Wickstrom's statement. And I think that we have only Alia left, but because Alia would like to present last, I think it's my turn now. Is that right, Melissa?
Yes, so there's you, Nella, and then we have Alia last. So can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nella.
So drawing largely on the principles of radical democracy, like the rest of you, I kind of argue for pluralization as a method for generating feminist community, research and practice, as opposed to an outcome of our efforts, as usually is the case. And this means generating a space in which a diversity of perspective can not only coexist, right, but do so in a productive tension so that they can bear on one another to effect more equitable practice. And hopefully I will be able to explain what I mean by this. So equality, diversity, and inclusion, as we know, has been relatively recently embraced by institutions such as universities, publishers, ranking and accrediting bodies. And some publishers have signed various charters, some founded separate journals that cover diversity and inclusion research specifically. some have invited editorial and authoring representation from the Global South. And every stride in this direction matters. But as we know, these efforts can sometimes sum up to symbolism, creating the appearance of equality without actually creating a culture and structures that can foster it. So important, but really not sufficient. And in their equality efforts, institutions often may draw an even deeper chasm between the global North and global South, solidifying each pretty uncritically, to the effect of the global North appearing in its entirety as Western, white, privileged, and the global South as Black and brown, underprivileged. And there is also a notable hangover of some hierarchical practices whereby some journals provide a platform for diverse voices without actually engaging with those voices, or even worse, drowning those voices into the mainstream, forcing knowledge into certain northern paradigms, just like Ebru drew our attention to, and Elo. So doing so may contribute to the suppression of indigenous, but also other marginalized epistemologies. So what can we do then differently? Well, we can start by drawing solidarity lines through and across this South-North divide to empower one another to uncover, revive, critically evaluate knowledges that are suppressed and rendered invisible and irrelevant through the broader processes that aim for uniformity and those processes that create exploitation. And importantly, we could put these knowledges from different geopolitical and epistemic contexts into conversation to shift horizons and enact meaningful change. So, like Alexia, I'm arguing for ever greater politicizing of feminist research. And just to give you a bit of a context here, so I was born in the global North, but the country I was born in doesn't exist anymore because Yugoslavia disintegrated through the violence of the civil war spanning between 1991 and 1999, brought about through democratization. So this experience made me aware of the fluidity and arbitrariness of boundaries such as nation states and concepts such as democracy and democratizing, and made me seek connections further afield from very early age. And what this looking beyond taught me is that neo-colonializing practices do not explicitly discriminate and have been employed for decades across the global South and global North. It is a process that is often referred to as democratization, development, globalization, economic integration, but people living in these spaces experience it mostly as rampant and often corrupt privatization of land enclosures, destructions of the environment, like Sire said, destruction of welfare, of cultural and epistemic imperialism. And some neo-colonializing forces also find their way into what is considered a developed country, whereby minoritized people are told to adapt, right, to take responsibility for forces outside their control, whilst their communities are being gutted and left behind. So experiences of work, of epistemic struggle, of interaction with the state, with supranational organizations and so on, are all important to explore. And even more important, perhaps, is putting these knowledges to work to enable this relational embodied emancipation to take place and hopefully pave the way to a more equal world. Because these transnational and transcontinental encounters that we've been talking about today do not only result in friendships, but they enable a form of relational emancipation, this sense of collective embodied connection that Melissa was talking about, that threads through time and space and bodies and lands, testing and rupturing our political stances and shifting our horizons, not broadening, but shifting specifically. Such encounters enable us to understand that our common ground is reinforced by our differences, and that we must enable equality efforts to cut through across and beyond the North-South divide, and to do so in a meaningful way that paves the way to a more embodied agonistic solidarity between all of us. Thank you. And I'll now pass you on to Alia, our last speaker. Alia, are you there? It's very early in Toronto.
Hi, everybody. I'm here. Can you hear me? Hi. Yes, it's very early in Toronto. Got up early, had some coffee, and I asked to go last because kind of waking up with the sun and the sunrise, and I wanted to show some things which wouldn't have been possible in the dark here. So thanks so much for accommodating that, everybody. So hi, everybody. My name is Alia Fortune Weston. My pronouns are she, her, and they, and I'm a queer mixed race person. My dad is English, my mom is South African, and I grew up in a garden in Zimbabwe. I'm sharing these kind of bits of information about me because I think it's important to kind of locate myself as a physical being and who I am, and that is very central to the kinds of work that I do, especially now and where my work is evolving. But I'd also like to acknowledge the lands that I'm on. So I acknowledge that I am currently in Toronto on the ancestral territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of the land that I live, work, and create on. This is also important for me to locate that I am on colonized land, still in the process of colonization here in so-called Canada. And yeah, and I work at OCAD University. It's an art and design university. And I am both, I'd say, a scholar and an artist designer. I trained as a jewelry designer, and then I ended up studying business and got into academia. And the interesting thing, it kind of mirrors some of the things that were shared in this conversation already, is that I was a jeweler who ran a business, and that became inconsequential to my work in academia. Did not matter at all that I actually worked and lived business in a way with myself and my body in the work that I was expected to do during my PhD, or like working in an academic perspective I studied in London in England, and I've also worked in Glasgow, and then I moved here. So it's important for me to say, like, I have a huge privilege of being able to come back to live, not to live here, but also to work at an art and design institution which recognizes these different parts of me, and to become a tenured professor here, where I can practice my work in a kind of deep and physical way that is legitimate. So I get to teach artists and designers about business, which is amazing and wonderful, and the most amazing students. And it always challenges me to think about, well, you know, how do I actually teach my students from a place of lived experience? Like, what do I get to teach them, to show them, and lead by example? I heard your quote, your experience, Alexia, where you said that you were told not to do particular kinds of work. When I worked in the UK at a business school, I was in the management department, and I co-wrote a paper about entrepreneurship, and I was told, actually, that's a totally different department. You shouldn't be writing about entrepreneurship. And I found it so bizarre because, like, everything's about business. Like, it became so granular. I was like, but I'm an entrepreneur, and business and entrepreneur, so, like, synonymous. Like, why am I being asked to make these distinctions? So ever since, I've been moving away from that kind of, like, being trapped in a box. And then the question was posed, so, like, what is feminist research to me? I'm not a feminist scholar, like, through feminist scholarship, but I always think about it as, for me, just, I get to be me. And I get to live, you know, from my perspective and myself as a queer artist, scholar, and an activist, through anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, anti-patriarchal perspectives. And if I'm going to show my students or teach my students, or I don't even want to use the word teach, but like work with my students around supporting them and learning about business for themselves, I need to be the world that I want to see. And the other element is that I'm going to show some work that I've been doing. And so I make jewelry, but I also do textiles, which I work with natural dyes. And I will show my dye garden here on my home patio, and some works that I've made, like some fabrics I've made. And often this kind of work is just seen as like women's homework, you know. Women are not paid for this kind of work historically. It's not seen as important. And this is also a feminist act of reclaiming this type of work and legitimizing it and saying, actually, I'm here and I do this work and this is important. But also at the same time, acknowledging the complexities for many people in the world, especially in the global South, who do work in textile or the fashion industry or these kinds of industries, which are very oppressive and where people are not treated well and they don't get paid well. And for this kind of like global machine of that type of industry. So yeah, I invite you to join me at my dye garden. It is sunrise. Oh, and this is my this is my co-presenter. Hello, this is Dill. I have two cats here which are being extremely rascally, and he's sitting on the chair that I was going to put my computer on, which of course he is. Kind of, because now that it's sunrise, the light is really kind of shining and glowing. But this is my dye garden. I really wanted to explore supply chains and think about, well, you know, as an artist, if I'm just going to sit on the floor because I can't sit on a chair because of the cat. I really want to think carefully about how I practice art, where my supplies are coming from, what are the supply chains, and you know, where do my raw materials come from? I realized that this was something that I found that I was lacking and missing in being able to share examples with my students. So I decided to really explore my supply chain and to make my own art materials. I started gathering materials to make inks for my drawing practice, and I started growing plants for dyes. So these are marigolds, cosmos, coreopsis, different kinds of dye plants. And there are some fabrics that I've made. A little bit wobbly, but over here, these are fabrics that I've made. And I gave myself the challenge, what could I make while really thinking about my supply chain and really understanding it, with a tiny little patio garden in Toronto, with a 14 square foot planter that has a like inbuilt self-watering cells in it. Yeah, what could I possibly grow? And what could I possibly make that could be thinking about the plants, connecting with the plants, thinking about circularity, thinking about reusing materials, sustaining resources, actually, you know, holding the materials and growing the plants from seed. And I grew them with my nephew, and yeah, we built this garden, and I've been able to make textiles. I've been able to dye with, I have indigo as well. And just like through this process to question, to think through processes for myself, to be reflexive, to inquire, to contend with all of the parts of the system, the ones that I resonate and feel like they work, and the ones that don't, that I still have to contend with. How much plastic do I still use, even though I'm trying to eliminate plastic? And also create examples for my students so that, you know, when I'm in the classroom, you know, they sometimes get to interact with business through media like social media. And it's this whole veneer of like perfection around business. So how do I show the behind the scenes, the ethical questions, the questions where you're like, actually, I can't make my best ethical like decision right now, but I'm going to make the best possible one that I possibly can in this moment. And what are the thinking process that I go through to do that? Yeah, so I think that's everything that I wanted to share. I just want to leave with a quote by Alice Walker, who said, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And so, you know, what are we doing and how are we living that and working with that to create the world that we want to be in? Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Alia. That was so beautiful. And thank you for giving us a glimpse of your lovely dye garden. I can't believe you're doing all that work on, as you said, 14 square feet of a planter. Amazing. So I just wanted to thank all the presenters, and I just wanted to invite you all to ask questions. You can do it either by typing in something in chat, and Federica and I will do our best to kind of to pose those questions for you, or you can raise your hand. Now, I have to say I'm not very skilled Zoom user. I usually use MS Teams, but I'm sure, you know, there's a huge overlap. But if you raise your hand, maybe that's a more expedient way to start a discussion. So I can't see any questions in the chat. A lot of greetings, a lot of praise, which is really heartwarming. I can't see questions, but perhaps, you know, people can just take some time to think about it, and we can talk between us a little bit about these various kind of maybe the commonalities that we can draw between our talks. Reading mine, for example, I felt like I'm echoing a lot of what other people were saying, and it's a nice feeling to know that we are on the same page about what we need to do and what kind of practices we need to enact going forward. Whatever kind of feminist community, whatever outlet our feminist community might end up having, be it reading groups or networks or even new journals, you know, so, you know, it's really nice to see that we are on the same page. Of course, there is a matter of hard labor that was kind of underpinning all our talks, like how much effort and how much hard labor of doing feminism actually means, you know. So I was just wondering if somebody wants to talk about perhaps about that hidden labor of doing feminism, hidden labor of solidarity building, of our speakers, or anything else. Melissa?
Thanks so much, Nella. Thank you to everybody for all these amazing, really inspiring contributions. I was just thinking actually about that point you were saying, Nella, about what ties all of these different contributions and reflections and interventions together. And for me, there's a really interesting question. I think we would all agree about, you know, why is this feminist work? Why is it needed? You know, why do we need this to move us into a different kind of future? And I thought, you know, what you were saying about how can we articulate, when you were reading Alice's words, how can we articulate an alternative visions of what it means to live and work and be together? And you outlined that so beautifully, Nella, in your reflections. I love that point that you made, that every stride matters. But, you know, as we're walking, as we're striding together, as we're planting together, as we're sharing work together, this is work. It is labor. It involves our skill, our time, our effort, our energy. Something which I have experienced quite a lot over the last few months as we have been looking to the future of this community is how absolutely vital that collaborative, collective labor is. How important it is to be mindful when people are doing more than their fair share, and to look at what you can offer. to understand the bigger picture. And this, for me, is what makes this feminist work. It's about understanding that you don't have to apologize or explain when you can't be at a meeting because your children or your family need you, or you have other commitments. And it's the first time, I think, in a 30-year academic career that I've confidently and comfortably been able to say, I can't make that meeting. I have to do something with my family, or I have parenting responsibilities, rather than pretending I was at a research meeting. Are any of my Essex or Loughborough colleagues here? No, thank goodness. Pretending I'm at a research meeting because I've actually got to do something with the children. And that is really, I think that's one of the things that really connects all of this work. It doesn't matter if we're parents or carers or whatever, it's about caring for each other and appreciating and valuing the contribution that everybody is making. So we can't do these things on our own, but when we pull the time, the energy, the resources, and the skills and the expertise and experience that we collectively and collaboratively bring, it's just incredible what we can achieve. So, I mean, Alia, I would absolutely love to grow and nurture a dye garden. I've got absolutely no idea how I would do that, but I'd love to learn that from you. And there are so many other things that we learn, you know, that we learn from each other. That's, for me, is what makes all of these different things that we've been talking about feminist work. And I'd really love to hear from kind of other people, especially Alia, but everybody, about what your thoughts are about what makes this feminist work and how does it help us kind of build our future. Because I can see how building and nurturing and drawing from a dye garden is feminist work. But to somebody outside of this conversation, that might not be so immediately obvious, but there are such important connections that we can take, you know, from what you've shared with us. So I'd love to hear from other people to know what you think about that.
But it's also right that kind of thank you for drawing attention to the wonderful, empowering side of our labor. It is really important to do that, and I think that we are now that we have surfaced just the volume of work that is involved in it and how precious it is to us. But also, on the other hand, it is important to surface it just to understand better our own efforts that are usually hidden, as you say, Melissa, usually hidden and outside of the sight, but also benefiting perhaps not that feminist community that much as these corporate publishers that we heard about in Alice's talk. So it's, I think it is important to draw awareness, our own even. I think because of that perpetual labor, we perhaps lose sight of the sheer volume of it and how much, how much discretionary work we do to sustain our communities and not only for our own sake in sustaining communities, but actually to enact something good in the world and in academia. So yeah, I think for me, this talk and hearing everyone, Ali and Sire talking about the land, the soil, that kind of preservation and non-exploitative approach to resources. This is what I heard from their talk. Elos and Ebru's talk about creating spaces for non-conforming bodies and doing more intersectional labor. All of that takes time, takes effort. Alexia's talk about activism, and it's funny. I was thinking when Alexia was presenting about that advice earlier, career advice she got from a colleague saying how activism is incongruent with academia. Whereas for all of us here, I think it was inextricable part and parcel of how we do academia and how we live our lives. So, but what that sentence does perhaps is just occludes the side of our labor that we depend on. You know, it renders it invisible and therefore irrelevant. So activism is not to be recognized, not to be seen, and yet we still continue to perform it. And importantly, it's not only us who benefit from it, and that's the whole kind of reason, I think, the core reason we are here today, to think about how we can then channel all this fantastic labor into something that is sustainable for all of us going forward. So anybody else want to jump in? Yeah, Ilo.
Yeah, I think just like when you talk about the massive amount of labor that is necessary to keep a community like this together, and like and also to defend our community against like all the all the threats that are like keep coming, and how to make sure that we find a new home and that we don't like get scattered and like fall apart. And I was just thinking about how we might need to focus more on resources and the different resources that we all have because of different kinds of privileges, because of different kinds of networks that we have access to, and how to make that work as well. So how we can become more aware of the different privileges that we own have and that we all have, and how to share that with the community in new ways. Like I just notice more and more that so much of like those privileges are like hidden when you just like have them and don't have to think about them, and like how powerful it can be to actually realize what kinds of privileges do you have when like they get pointed out by others that maybe don't have them. So to like then be more critical with each other within our community and find ways to do that, to point out all the resources that are actually there and that we could access, and how to also maybe infiltrate other systems around us and get resources to continue doing what we want to do, and just like to find a more like a resource-based approach where we think of like our privileges that we own have in different ways, like in a more proactive way of like thinking like, what can we do with this? How can we support each other better in more effective ways? Yeah, to find like a less like guilt-trippy approach to privilege, and use it more as a community, and find new ways of like how we can make use of all kinds of different privileges that we have among us.
That's wonderful, wonderful extra intervention, Ilo, and I completely agree. And listening to you, I was thinking how academia teaches us that criticism, you know, the ugly side of criticisms, and the ugly side of critique. Whereas in feminist community, criticism, critique, you know, pointing out the difference or different privileges that we have is a strength, right? That this is something that we could use for the better of our feminist community and broader. Ebru, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that because it just reminds me of, you know, some scholars have written about this, but the actual lived experience when privilege and disadvantage go hand in hand. Because, you know, especially in academia, I don't think we are ever totally privileged or totally disadvantaged either. And something I just was thinking of is like the situatedness of our different kinds of privileges, especially when it comes to, for instance, class. We talk about class every day, but actually, when I look around, I personally come from very lower class conditions, and I think it's difficult in sometimes even feminist spaces to relate to people because most people that are in academia, what are the chances that these people come from working class conditions? Because I think most times you already have had more resources to reach that state. And then we have all of these different complexities coming in together, like ethnicity, religion, which my research is talking a lot about like situatedness when it comes to religious and sexual identities, and it can be very isolating, but I also feel like there's such an opportunity to come together through that. And yeah, it's been lovely to hear everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for that lovely intervention, and I completely agree. You know, class is seldom talked about, really. You know, we talk about privilege and underprivilege, but yes, class plays an important role in how our lives are structured. So I think we should probably create more space about talking about class, right? And class in academia. Right. I will invite people to keep thinking about questions and comments. And I can see Kate Grosser left a comment. It strikes me that something different about this particular feminist community is that there is a general atmosphere and intention of kindness. This is a real significant contribution in an increasingly violent world. This is living and modeling a difference and the world we want to live in. It seems very important to me that we maintain and nurture this kindness despite the many significant differences, including differences of opinion, that we have among and between ourselves. Thanks, everyone. This is a lovely comment by Kate. Thank you, Kate. And yes, I think we all set out deliberately to demonstrate and embody care in this work. I think it was like an intentional approach to creating this community, and I'm really glad it is felt. Kate, Kenny, thanks all for such insightful session. I agree, Ibra and Nell on this point. Yeah, Alexia.
Sorry, I don't know how, I can't find the little hand. Thank you, everyone. And of course, I agree. I just wanted to add one more thing. Based on my own experience, I think we have to remember that it matters. So every little thing that we do in our daily lives that shows care or kindness or compassion, we have to remember that it matters, because sometimes I feel that the pressure around me and the belittling of things like spending more time with a student or writing a review that is a little bit more caring or more soft. I mean, I was told many times that I need to be more harsh, you know, and I need to be more direct. But I feel like it's these everyday little things that ultimately lead to bigger things and lead to change. It's that 1 extra hour spent on our teaching. It's a more caring review. It's giving someone a second chance. It's giving the microphone to someone who doesn't often get a chance to voice their opinion. And at the same time, I feel like the older I get, I realized that it's not so much that I didn't have the right lenses on for academia, because I went into academia with a very, very idealistic perspective about learning and spreading knowledge, and and obviously it wasn't that. It was a very harsh reality. But I think the older I get, I realize that actually I did have the right lenses on. Yeah, it's just that people were trying to take these lenses away from me to see something that is not what I wanted to see or what I think things should be like in academia. So the second thing I wanted to say is we need to believe in our lenses and our experience. And I love what you said, Alia. We are the ones we have been waiting for. There's a lot of wisdom in that.
Thank you, Alexia, and you're absolutely right. And also, there is something about the care. I think it's going to be discussed in another session in our kind of Atlas reading group next time. But people talk about care and caring and approaching stuff with care. But again, going back to the first point that we opened up in this discussion part, it's care is labor. Care is not just sitting in compassion with one another. Care is active political work, and that is something that is also seldom talked about, like class, and this is where caring, like a bulk of caring happens in the working class, because speaking of privileges that Elo was highlighting, it is where infrastructures of support are lacking. So we have to care more, and we have to proactively care. So care is activism, care is political work. So yeah, thanks for flagging that, Alexia. Really, really important. And I also love that Alia, you have really powerful lines in your talk. We are the people we've been waiting for. I think you're right. Yeah. Sadly, I wish there was like a savior somewhere, someone to rely on. But yeah.
That's the whole point, Nella. We have each other.
Well, that is true. That is true. Yeah.
Thank you.
Melissa, thank you so much for sharing the detail about the Butlers group. It's a wonderful space, talking about the lovely kind of feminist spaces. I haven't missed a single session since you started, Melissa. So it is where I go to recharge my batteries and feel sane.
Thank you, Nella. And I think you'll probably agree. I think Kate's here as well, who comes along. It's we do talk about Butler and Butler's work, but we also talk about ideas and thinking that have influenced and inspired Butler, and other people who draw on and develop Butler's work in a different way. And we talk about ideas, we talk about things we've been reading and thinking, but we also talk about things that we've been doing and experiencing in our lives, both in our work and outside of work. So it's very informal. There's no preparation required, and people can just dip in and out and come to as much or as little as they like. So I've popped my email address in there. If you would like to join us at any point, or know somebody who might like to, you would be very, very welcome to come along. Thanks, Nella.
Thanks, Melissa. So I have received a message from Federica that we are out of time, but I see a hand raised by Alia. So is it okay to allow that, final?
That's fine.
Alia,
That's fine.
Excellent. Alia, over to you to wrap it up.
Thanks so much. Just a very brief maybe comment or invocation is that planting a seed for thinking about what are the ways that we can embrace publication in many different formats and ways and possibilities, and how this type of community where we're all gathered thinking about work that is delegitimized in management and like business studies, and in this bubble that we're in, because it's a bubble and we're forced into it, and then we're forced to publish and do work in really particular ways. So how can we embrace different ways of demonstrating and making a mark on the world? And I mean, and I say this also because, yes, I work at an art and design university, I teach business, and I make things like this, but I'm in a liberal studies faculty, which means there is still an expectation to write and to publish books and articles. And so making a dye cloth is not a book or an article. And yeah, so if we have a new journal, what are the different kinds of possibilities that we have for sharing different kinds of work? I just want to invoke that.
Absolutely. And your conversation links to other similar conversations that we have been having in different kind of feminist spaces. But this is a good thing, because it just demonstrates that we are all thinking about the same issues and about different ways of articulating our feminist ideas. So yeah, as you said, a cloth can speak, right? It's not only word that we have to rely on. On that lovely thought, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our lovely audience. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for our panelists for getting up early, staying up late. That must have been really challenging, but again demonstrates the dedication to this space and this kind of activism. And hope to see you, many of you, in Butler's reading group or in other spaces. Till next time.
Yes, thank you. Just also from CMS In-Touch, we also have some very interesting new event happening that I would like to share, and it fits really nicely in what you said, because it's about doing things differently. Surprise. And it is about a special issue that we're editing for Culture and Organization, which is a very inclusive journal. If you think about your work, this is a space where you can submit, and it's about doing things differently around disability, disability. And I thought that was something that I think also is important to consider in our discussion around gender, that it also, of course, intersects with other identities. And I'm doing a lot around disability and neurodiversity. So I would also love to see to include this community in the space that we're creating together. But thanks from CMS In-Touch, and thanks you for everyone who came today. I will stop the recording in a minute and we will upload it to the YouTube channel. And yeah, I hope that we have a follow-up session, guys, to discuss what we can do now together.
Thank you very much. And also welcome to publish, consider Tamara Journal for publishing. I've posted the link in the chat.
Lovely.
Up and running again.
Yes. Thank you, CMS In-Touch.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
So
Lovely to see you. Bye.